In the AI industry, there's been a lot of changes to pricing. For instance, Agentforce set up 3 different pricing models over the span of 18 months. And now buyers can actually choose which one they want to go with. But as we all know, pricing structures are not created equal. Sometimes it is beneficial for the buyer, sometimes it's beneficial for the seller. So in this video, we're going to go through some common pricing models and how buyers are going to be affected by each one of them. But first, let's actually talk about what you're going to see less of, and one of those is per seat pricing. This is a pretty common one. It's been around for the past couple of decades, and this is a flat fee per the amount of users every single month. And the reason why this worked so well historically was because that additional seating, when we added on additional 5 or 10 seats, didn't cost the vendor that much. But now, in the age of AI, every single AI query is going to have additional costs associated with it. And so, according to Bessemer, AI companies see 50 to 60% gross margins versus the traditional 80-90% for SaaS models. Now, I was going to use GitHub Copilot as an example for a per seat model, but this June they did actually change it to consumption. And the reasoning here is actually pretty representative of the broader industry as a whole. So they said a quick chat question and a multi-hour autonomous coding session were costing the customer the same amount. And they directly said the old model is no longer sustainable. Now, I want to be clear that per seat hasn't actually been phased out entirely at this moment. Microsoft 365, for instance, still has their per seat license, but they have adopted a hybrid based model for those who are using the Copilot Studio. Now, if you're looking to buy AI solutions, you're looking around the market, this trend will affect you. When we were evaluating per seat usage back in the day, this was pretty simple because it would just be a comparison of how many seats there were. But now we have to forecast what the usage is going to be. This might make it harder to evaluate in between vendors, but also too, you might have a pre-approved budget and you won't actually know if it goes over based off your forecasted model. So this obviously leads us to our next model, which is the consumption-based model. And so here you'll pay for tokens or you'll pay for any compute that's been utilized. Now on the vendor side, this does make a lot of sense because this is a known cost to them. But on the buyer side, it's pretty difficult, especially if you're not IT, because you don't know what a token means or what you're going to get out of it. And as I mentioned before, it's difficult to allocate budget. Zenskar even reports that their customers asked to push overage invoices into next year's budget. And I think the hardest part here is you can't actually translate token usage directly into business outcomes. So here, if the AI is doing more tasks, it's going to raise your bill regardless. And this does incentivize reducing tokens and overall application usage. Now, Lean AI is a pretty good example here. They automate support across multiple different business functions, and they originally started with a consumption model. But they found that customers actually became wary of utilizing the application because of the consumption. And then once they moved to an outcome-based model, which we'll get to in a little bit, the adoption and ROI improved. Now on a side note here, if you're a stakeholder and you're accountable for that rollout, this low usage could look like a change management issue, for instance. And so you may try and diagnose this problem with adding on more training or maybe getting some more champions on the project. But as we're tracking employee usage across tokens and models and all these different applications, then this may drive them away from that. Now, typically on the buyer side, the goal here is to actually optimize your usage as much as possible. And this could be as simple as just reviewing model tiers and going to a lower model, or it could be implementing techniques like prompt caching, for instance. And so this is a larger topic that I'm actually going to cover in a separate video, but the big takeaway here is that you're going to be focusing on cost reduction rather than just focusing on business value by itself. Now, the next model is a workflow-based model, and here you're going to get paid per completed task. As an example, you could be drafting a contract, and you'll have to pay per draft. And this can be seen as an improvement over consumption, because this unit is something that you are already recognizing as a real task. And what's good is that you can directly compare what the task is now versus what it is with AI. Now, the only thing to keep in mind here is that you're going to be paying per task and not for the result. And so if the AI drafts something badly and then your team has to fix it, well, then you just paid for both the AI implementation and also your team as well. Now, I think the thing to check here is actually how to define the task itself. For instance, Agentforce, they originally were charging 2 cents per conversation, but this started breaking down once the agents started calling backend processes, and then it was hard to track which process was made for which conversation. And so before you go forward with this sort of model, you want to understand what does count and what doesn't count as a full task. And then let's say that a task fails halfway through, what do you do in this situation? Now, this brings us to our last model, which is outcome-based pricing. Now think about the workflow pricing, but this is actually guaranteeing the success of the outcome. So here, instead of paying for a draft, for instance, you'll actually only pay when that draft gets accepted. Now, this is usually beneficial for the buyer, especially since the vendor now has to spend a lot more time and energy to make sure the AI outputs are very, very good. If it's not, then the vendor is going to have to cover every single failed attempt. But there is a nuance here, and that is identifying what counts as a success or what counts as a failure here. When we were talking about workflow pricing before, it's pretty quantifiable about what is a draft versus not a draft. But with outcome-based pricing, you're going to have to define really carefully what a success and what a failure is. And then the vendor obviously has to approve that. Now, Zendesk has a pretty good example here. Their original model counted a resolution when a customer went quiet for 72 hours. And as you can see, there's multiple reasons why a customer might not reply in 72 hours. It could be that they actually got the real answer, or it could be that they didn't get the answer and then just moved on and talked to a competitor. But here, they were both being billed as resolutions. Now, in May, Zendesk did actually fix this, where now only verified resolutions are billed accordingly. And there's actually a separate model here that's reviewing what's been resolved or not. So when looking at something like outcome-based pricing, you do want to see who is defining the unit, and then what happens when that unit ends up becoming wrong, and then whether there's a way that you can actually audit it and keep track of it. Now, when you build out an AI use case, obviously you're going to want to scale it across your company. So now let's look at how these different pricing models interact at scale. So per seat, this one is pretty straightforward. It's typically a step function, and this only really has issues when the utilization is low. And this is because you're paying for access and not really for the work itself. So every license that somebody doesn't utilize, you're going to be paying for. Consumption is actually the exact opposite. So this is going to be an issue once the utilization is very high and you're not getting any real value out of it. Now, workflow, this is going to scale relatively linearly. The only caveat is if the accuracy is low. Now, outcome-based pricing is actually probably closest to true linear scaling that you would realistically care about. The only thing to keep in mind is that you're probably going to have to renegotiate the contract. And the reason is because the KPIs that you initially signed up for is most likely going to change as you scale it over time. And so realistically for this kind of pricing, you'll probably have more of a vendor lock-in, so you want to make sure that you can renegotiate it as you scale. Now, this was a quick video about going through different pricing models. I'm currently going through this right now. You're going to be seeing usage-based pricing the most, I would say, throughout evaluating vendors. Now, in my next video, I want to go through the details about how to reduce costs. Anyways, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.